Texas gets back to practice. The Best of Texas Round 2 and USAWP Board Member Houston Hall. Here we go. It's the TXWaterpolo Podcast. I'm James Smith in Austin, and Joe Linehan is in North Texas as usual. Joe, we have to stop using this show as a way to just discuss like hugely profound things for an hour before we get on here, because now my mind is all rattled. I have the notes in front of me, so I know what we're going to talk about, but man, oh man, we kind of use this as a big phone system, I think.
I don't know about that, but half the stuff that we talk about before we actually have the podcast, we can't put on the podcast. So
if people could hear these conversations, it would be pretty interesting, I think. Well, yeah. I haven't been recording, by the way, Joe, so you don't have to worry about it. It's all good.
It's all good nowadays.
It's all good. Very interesting week in water polo in the state of Texas. I personally have some affiliation with that, but the big news in some ways is that USA Water Polo came out finally with a statement, or at least guidance about how to return to practice. So they're starting to recognize that there are teams like mine that we'll get into that are either getting ready or are already back in the pool.
Yes, and by the time people hear this, all the coaches and club admins have already gotten the email. Most members will have gotten an email as well. But yeah, I mean, there's just some basic guidelines. All coaches, if they're going to be on deck, they're going to have to complete a waiver or just kind of check off a waiver that's already within their membership. All athletes, if they are going to be attending, they're also going to have to click off that waiver as well. I am telling all coaches out there, make sure you read the email from USA Water Polo. And then more importantly, know what your local guidelines are. Know what the Texas guidelines are. Know what your local kind of the city guidelines are. And probably even more specifically, know what your individual facilities guidelines are to start and return to play. And then once you know all that, have a game plan and send it out to your parents and athletes with plenty of time and communicate. Because if you don't, the athletes will not come back. You need to be able to do that and have a game plan to make sure everybody feels safe and that you actually practice your social responsibility here. But, in order to get back in and athletes to come back to the pool, it's just my big belief that you need to do it right and you need to communicate it properly to everybody. Yeah. And then people will come back, because I guarantee those kids and the parents want the kids out of the house.
The most
and they
definitely
want them to go do something. They want them tired, etc. So, and the kids are looking forward to going back in the pool. But if there's no plan and it's not communicated properly, the parents are probably going to hesitate. So. Right.
Well, we can get into my team here in a second, because that's not been my experience, but that could just be the circumstances of the team.
Yeah.
But this USA Water Polo letter, I know you want everybody to read it, but holy crow, that is a long letter, and I'm sure that this will ruffle maybe some feathers. But to me, it basically was a very long-winded way of saying, here are some guidelines that we think there are good ideas, but overall follow your local requirements, and that's and my boss has said the same thing about US Swimming, is that they came out with something that was pretty lengthy, but it was essentially saying, look, it's use your best judgment and follow whatever your local regulations are.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what it is. But yeah, and everybody's going to have to, the athletes and parents, hey, if you choose not to go back to the pool, that's okay.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Absolutely right.
If programs choose not to start until August, that's okay. But if you do choose to come back in, here are some base guidelines that we would like you to follow, and make sure that you follow the rules. That's all. Yeah. Because if you don't, then you're not going to be insured, and you're going to get kicked out of your facility. You're not going to be able to practice for months.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
So it is just a reminder that for in April and into May, there was no practice and no competitions, period.
Yeah.
For USA Water Polo, there was no insurance available for anybody. Now you actually have insurance available if you choose to follow your local guidelines and your facility guidelines. And there is no competitions yet. There are no sanctioned competitions yet.
No, we can't even think about it yet.
Yeah, that'll come kind of with this, and it's going to be from 25% to 50% to 75%. Eventually, everybody's going to be playing, scrimmaging, and we're going to see this in our rearview mirror. I don't know how long it's going to take, but we will get to that point at some point.
Yeah, that was at least we made reference to it in our conversation before this about there's a lot of really interesting news about vaccines and antibody testing and stuff. So I'm mildly encouraged by all that. But in the meantime, this is piggybacking really on Governor Abbott's announcement yesterday about allowing more businesses to open. And Abbott's announcement is fine, and it included such things as gymnasiums and such. But what was another thing that was really interesting is the UIL today made a comment on Twitter, and I'm going to read it actually. It says, UIL is aware of Governor Abbott's May 18 announcement and is actively working with the appropriate state officials to allow schools to begin limited summer strength and conditioning and marching band activities on June 8. Once finalized, details will be released to the school. So a little movement from the UIL.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I mean, there's movement, so people are going to be starting to make some decisions, and some facilities might start being open for either school district programs or even open to renters as well. It's going to be interesting.
It is. It's just, I think we're out there in front of the whole country in a lot of ways, Joe. I mean, we can. I'm just going to get into it. I mean, I had our first practice in 2 months since March 12, I think, was our last practice before we took a break for spring break. So it's been over 2 months, and it was just completely awesome to be back on the pool deck. It was just so great.
Yeah. So how'd it go? So how did you have your facility, like the rules, and then communicate to your parents?
Yeah, what's interesting is I'm starting to get feedback from people all over the country about what are the rules, and you and I have had this discussion as well. So the city of Round Rock has been in contact with my boss and is telling him, essentially, these are the guidelines, and the guidelines are basically what the state has set out, and that that 2 meters distance and wearing a mask and washing your hands and washing, all of those kinds of things. And I realize that sounds very sort of amorphous, and it is actually, because I think these things are going to change over time. So from a practical standpoint, what we did is our deck happens to be huge. It's an outdoor facility. We have a whole bunch of lounge chairs. And so what we did is set up lounge chairs, each of which is 2 meters apart. And when you show up, you put your stuff down there and you don't move it. And that's where you stay also. So any dry land, any, lecture, conversation, whatever, has to be done with you seated at your lounge chair, And so that worked out really well for us yesterday. Now, our facility is not required to wear masks. It's optional. And so I've been telling our families that as well, is that they can choose to do that if they want to. But from a practical standpoint, there's winds of 3 to 5 miles an hour going on all the time. And so I did not wear a mask for most of yesterday, but what we were assiduous about was making sure that everybody kept their distance. And that included during the swim sets, that included during passing and shooting and all of those things, which we did, all of which was great, but everything was spaced. It had to be structured so that people weren't, making body contact. But other than that, it was in its own weird, strange way, it was kind of normal.
But now here's the biggest question, the most important question. Did the kids have fun?
Well, that's a mixed question. Here's why. I hit them pretty hard. Like, one of the best and worst things about this break has been just the ability to learn. There's been so much. I think I'm going to rename myself Jack Coker. I don't know, but just learning so much from these online sessions with these really, really good coaches that I was like, we don't have time to mess around. So we did a good decent amount of dry land. We did a good decent amount of goggles on swimming, which I don't prefer. I'd rather not do that, but we just have to get back into shape. And then we were working the whole time. It was great. It was really great. No one was sitting around. So fun,
but the kids
yes.
must have had a smile on their face, right?
They did. They were so happy to be back. The parents were ecstatic. It was great. All of that stuff really worked out well.
Well, good. I mean, and just like, I'm sure it's going to be a little bit more difficult with the younger kids to start with, because, they're gonna go right into it, and they may not kind of fully understand the the social distancing concepts and such. But I would assume the older kids were a little bit more understanding of stuff.
They were helpful in that way. One of my problems is I've got siblings, and so these siblings have been cooped up together for 2 months. So to them, social distancing is ridiculous, at least between one another, right? But at least from an optics perspective, we don't want some city official driving by and just seeing people all, gathered together. So I had to tell them, look, I know this might sound ridiculous, but you have to stay apart as well, even though you have been in your house for 2 months and you're going home with this person as well. So, but yeah, it was 97 degrees too. So it was like a real Texas, return to the pool.
Yeah. Did you get a little sunburn?
No, I don't. I stay in the shade. In the shade, and I'm my old friend Sasha, when I was coaching in California, used to make fun of me for putting on sunscreen, and now I think he's regretting that. So yeah, I'm a big fan of sunscreen. No problem.
Well, congratulations, James. You're the first program that I know of that is back in the water. Definitely the first program in Texas. You're leading the troops, and I'm sure you've shared your story over and over again, even just since yesterday. So yeah, I mean, we're hoping that a ton of other clubs get to start kind of going, beginning of June, the beginning of July, or at the very least the beginning of August.
So. I will tell you that I am surprised at how almost proud I am that we're among the first teams, because in some ways, who cares? But we're a little tiny club. We're nobody really knows about us a whole lot, which is totally understandable. So I'm actually quite pleased that that news is getting out. But that does not change the fact whatsoever that I'm delighted to see other teams ramping up as well. I cannot wait. I'm so very happy for them. And also not too pleased about the ones that can't. It's not cool. But yeah, it's been a very, very interesting couple of weeks, because who knew that this was going to happen? By the way, for those of you who might be outside of the state of Texas, I would love to know if there's other teams that are already practicing again. I don't know. Joe just said that it doesn't seem like it, and that's been my impression as well, just based on social media and other things. But if there's somebody else practicing, I would love to know that, and I'll push it, that information out as well.
Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah, it's everybody has their own little story, and you have a very unique to being the first one in Texas, and now we're going to get to hear some other stories, and hopefully everybody's going to get to share their experiences, kind of get back in the water here kind of this summer at some point.
I hope so too. I just got a note from somebody in Ohio and it sounds like they're facing a similar situation. So that's good. Like that's they're getting ready to hop back in. Anyway. All right, Joe, that's enough of that. Let's come back with what we're introducing as the Best of Texas 2. Just wait.
Right about now, you might be expecting some song and dance about a product you don't need. Well, shush, we don't advertise here, and we want to keep it that way. So we sure would appreciate your help. Show your support by going to TXWaterpolo.com/donate so we can keep covering the sport we love in the great state of Texas.
Hi, this is Natalie Benson, and you are listening to a podcast about water polo in Texas.
September's gone and I shouldn't have stayed. My hopes have all faded, but nothing else changed. The city.
It's James and Joe back with you, segment 2 here. And as we said right prior to this, is that we have come up with, and we've been discussing this a little bit in sort of broad terms, but now we've branded it Best of Texas 2. So this is we talked about how what we wanted to do was discuss the best programs, and that can be a little bit difficult in my estimation, because I would tend to look at, I know what you mean by best programs, I guess, but it always focuses back on, I would just call them like individual teams, but it's not all that true. And I'm all over the map right now, so I get that part. But so for me, I go back to California, and I think modern day, and I'm a Wilson guy, so this is very difficult to say, but modern day of the early 2000s, the best team I've ever seen. Like, they're just phenomenal. And on the girls' side, Laguna Beach is probably the best team. So, but that's probably what we're looking for, is something like that, like programs from a particular era of time that has shown sort of consistent excellence.
So we're going to talk about the consistent, or like the teams from a specific decade or such, but we're going to actually have it in the hands of everyone listening to vote again. So we're going to have an Elite Eight, and it's going to be the programs. And that'll be like, let's just use Sterling since they won the boys and girls, right? So it'll be the Sterling program, as far as they've won X amount of girls championships and X amount of boys championships, going up a different, against a different team that has won this amount of boys championships and this amount of girls championships.
Right.
So we can see, we have already discovered that the 2007 boys and the 2007 girls from Sterling were the best teams in Texas history. Yeah. Now we're going to talk about the best programs, and that is the school teams, and that boy, girl, or just boy. So
right, I like that. Yep,
it's going to be a lot of fun, and then we're thinking about kind of putting the Houston area programs together against the outside of Houston kind of areas together. It's going to be a lot of fun out there.
Yeah, I think that the idea of having those regional rivalries and having them beat up on each other is actually a great idea. It sort of sets it up in sort of regional championship format like we have in actuality, right? That's a really cool way to put it.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So the idea is we're going to be putting that together here over the next few days and rolling it out for next week. So we'll talk about the first round and the matchups on the podcast next week. And then everybody will have a week to vote, just like we did in the Best of Texas teams, the Best of Texas programs. And then we'll have 3 rounds of voting. So we're going to have an Elite Eight, kind of a Final Four, and then the final 2 programs. It's going to be a lot of fun.
So we have a general idea of what those programs are, right? Is that fair to say? But I am fascinated by and want input from whoever's listening is what do you think? But anyway, contact us if you have any thoughts about this at pod@txwaterpolo.com, pod at txwaterpolo.com. But make your case. That's really the important part. It's not enough to say it was this team. It's why. Like what signs have they shown of, say, consistency or excellence or those kinds of things? That's what's really important to me.
And that's consistently over time. We're not talking about just a really good team in this year that might have been excluded from the top 16 boys or the top 16 girls. It is going to be a school that has had kind of good teams from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and into 2010s. I mean, that had a 10-year dominant period or a 20-year kind of dominant period. Yeah. So, and I can tell you right now, Baytown Sterling is probably going to be one of those teams. So there you go.
Oh, I've ruined it. You've biased the voting again, Joe. How dare you?
I'm not biased for voting. I'm just saying that they're going to be one of the top 8. So.
I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. Right. So anything else to talk about this? Because we've got we have a cool interview coming up.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So another thing we're going to be doing is each of the next couple of weeks, we're also going to be talking about a decade and we've done this a little bit before, but maybe highlighting some of the kind of the better, the better teams that won each decade. And today I think we're going to do a little bit of the 70s, right? Because there wasn't a whole lot of water polo back then. This is when water polo first got started here in Texas. Was in the 70s. Like you had I think 5 state champions for girls. I think you had 7 or 8 for boys. But there were some very good teams back then. And go ahead.
Yeah, let me chime in here because I'm the newcomer to this. This was among the most fascinating things for me about Texas high school water polo. Was, of course, I like to tout all the time that the girls were playing in the state of Texas, a couple decades before they did in California. That's a point of pride. But I just love the way that it's distributed geographically. So those early teams, those A&M consolidated teams on the boys' side in particular, they were pretty darn good.
Yeah, and I think that was I would say they were the best teams there with Bobby Leland and his brother kind of leading the way, Bill Leland. But that's where water polo was in the state of Texas. A&M had a varsity team.
Right.
And, Dennis Fosdick was coaching them. I guarantee back in the day that Dennis Fosdick probably had something to do with Bob and Bill Leland being pretty good water polo players.
Absolutely.
I guarantee that they might have snuck into a few practices and played a little bit, So let's just say the rules weren't probably strong, but they took advantage of those opportunities, which is the biggest thing. So,
Sure.
And it came out. They won they won the boys in 72 and 73, and and Lamarck won in 74. And then, and we'll talk about St. Mark's here in a second, who won in 75. But then we also had Clear Creek, who was, is one of those dominant teams, kind of throughout the decades that have won consistently in both the boys and girls side. And then in the late 70s is when the San Antonio domination started. So.
And that's the boys side, or sorry, the girls side as well. I mean, it wasn't there wasn't quite the A&M College Station presence on the girls side as there was on the boys in the early 70s. And so you tended to see teams from Houston and San Antonio mainly, right?
Yeah, you had I think Clear Creek girls won the first 3 state champions. It was 1972, 1975, and 1977. So they probably could have won 6 or 7 straight if they really wanted to.
That's a good point.
And then I think Clear Lake started and they won in 1978, and then Alamo Heights again won the boys and the girls in 1979 to kind of kick off that decade of dominance from the San Antonio schools, which we'll talk about next week.
Yeah, we have some time to figure that out, but I'm just so interested in how these programs came about. It's like in general, you can say that teams emerged, kind of as a result of their swim season ending, right? So then a lot of times they wanted something to do, and water polo, you hear about coaches like Doug Andrew, who didn't really know about the sport. He was a swim coach and had to pick it up. And so, but you have to have that kind of, interest. So how did Alamo Heights come about? That kind of thing. I'm can't wait to actually learn about that.
Yeah, and we're going to be doing some interviews over the next couple of weeks. That's going to highlight a little bit more of the history. And today's interview is actually with Houston Hall, who actually was a member of the 1975 St. Mark's team that won the state championship. So it's going to be fun to kind of compare and contrast water polo then. And Houston is also currently the he's on the USA Water Polo Board of Directors. So
yes,
he can kind of compare and contrast kind of water polo that's about 50 years apart. So.
And still active on the Masters level. I know that, right?
Yeah, and he still plays with Dallas Water Polo. So it's awesome.
Yeah, that's precisely the kind of person we want to talk to. And actually, you surprised me because I know Houston Hall decently. Like we've obviously met each other several times, but I didn't remember that he played for St. Mark's. I mean, he's obviously within that community, but I just forgot completely. So not only did he play for St. Mark's, but he played for the 75 team that won the state championship, which is, that's just so cool. So I'll really look forward to hearing from him. And actually, we'll just do that right now. Coming next are excerpts from that conversation that Joe had with Houston Hall, and we'll be right back with that.
Hey, this is Mark Lawrence from Austin College, head coach of the men's and women's water polo programs and home of our Kangaroos. When I'm interested in what's going on with Texas water polo, I always listen to TXWaterpolo Podcast.
Houston, how are you doing?
Doing great, Joe. How are you?
I'm good. So today's we are with Houston Hall. So Houston is in a very unique position. He played water polo back in the day, back in the 1970s with St. Mark's, and he also is involved highly with water polo now, kind of currently up in North Texas and nationally with USA Water Polo. So Houston has a long list, so it's going to take me a sec to do all the introductions here. So Houston played at St. Mark's. He graduated in 1978. He won a state championship in 1975. And in 1977, when he was all-state team captain his senior year. And then he went off to go play at Harvard, kind of where he was all New England. he was captain and MVP his senior year, and he graduated in '82. And then he came back and played Masters water polo with Dallas Water Polo Club. He helped with the growth of the sport in North Texas, and he is currently on the USAWP Board of Directors, and he helps with local clubs like Pegasus and Thunder and such in North Texas. So, Houston, welcome.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for taking the time. How are you doing during the whole COVID-19 stuff going on?
Well, like everybody else, I'm getting kind of antsy, but letting my hair grow out, trying not to get too fat, and keep busy.
Are you being successful on the exercise kind of side of things? I know I'm not.
I've not been very successful yet.
That's okay. Have you picked up a new hobby or doing anything fun during this whole time?
The fun part has been having a bunch of my family living with me. Two of my daughters who are, kind of came home to shelter in place, and one lives in New York and she's home working remotely. One is at University of Virginia, and she came home for the last 2 months to finish up the semester. And so it's been fun seeing family.
Yeah, well, good. So now, hopefully, you've been able to catch up a little bit on the Best of Texas. The main reason is because the 1975 St. Mark's team was represented there. So they didn't win the first round, but just tell me a little bit about that 1975 team.
That team, I was a sophomore on that team, and I think I probably weighed about 130 pounds right there. But we had some fantastic players. We had a guy named Scott Phillips, who was the only guy I've ever seen who could throw a water polo ball against the wall and pop it.
Oh, geez. Okay,
and
there you go.
Yeah, he later went on to play for Fosdick at A&M.
Nice.
So he was a real water polo player. Then we had some people like Greg Krause, who became a incredibly fast swimmer and would have made the 80 Olympics if we'd gone. And he was just super fast. So we had a combination of, a few people that actually had been coached somewhere. And I think Scott Phillips had gotten coaching from Dennis Fosdick. But the coach of the team at that year was an English teacher named Tim Shutt. And so it was a kind of a combination. And Texas water polo back then was really in its early stages. I mean, we had I don't think there was another team. There might have been one other high school that played water polo in North Texas. So every weekend we'd get in these big, Ford vans, and our coach, John Stutzman, who was also our calculus teacher, and our swim coach, Ken Merton, would drive, a dozen boys down to Austin or San Antonio or Houston, and we'd stay wherever we could stay. I remember one tournament, we stayed at they opened up some gym that was going to be demolished, and we stayed on the floor. We might stay in a hotel room.
Everybody has budgets. So there you go.
Yeah. And I've seen some pictures, and we were I'm sure it's very similar to what it's like now when you get boys on the road. But, we had a good time. We had a really good time. I remember one time we stayed on Jim Yates' apartment floor.
Jim, the man that is still playing, he is going to World Nationals, everything. He's still the most fit player out there in the water. So you guys also won in 1977 when you were like the team captain and got all state. So what was the differences between the 75 team and the 75?
I was not the team captain, but I did get all state. And so I'd say that team was maybe not physically as good, but probably deeper. By then we had John Stutzman was the head coach, and Ken Merton was his assistant. Stutzman actually worked at it and learned a lot about water polo, and was a pretty good coach. But we were in pretty good condition. I'd say we were in very good condition. We had a really talented goalie, Peter Krause, who was my best friend in high school. He was like 6'7", and back then we played in our shallow deep pool at St. Mark's, and so in the shallow end, he was virtually unstoppable.
So back then, did you have one of those big, huge goals in the shallow end?
Yeah.
Like the wall goals? So like
exactly.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah,
I
but
remember
Peter-
playing on those back in the day. So
Peter could fill it up, and the only games we really had up at St. Mark's were we would have we'd play SMU a lot. We played their club team, and we'd play outdoor in their 50-meter pool, which was quite fun because by then Greg Krause was at SMU, and so Greg and Peter could battle it out. But we'd always beat SMU. I remember one
and
time.
that must have felt good.
Yeah, it was fun. We had the Mexican junior national team come up to play us one time, and we were shocked at how dirty they were. You know, we were these, you know, quote unquote badasses from St. Mark's, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of a contradiction in terms, but yeah, those guys were small but vicious. I remember
They still are. So
yeah, and they still are probably, but we lost to those guys. But we got, you know, the team was good. We had the two captains were Peter Krause and Sandy Watling. Sandy was a really good player. He could, you know, steal the ball, pass the ball, shoot. You know, he was in great shape. He was a natural, and I was kind of the guy that liked to shoot a lot, and some of them would go in. And
but did you like to play defense? That's the question.
I like to play defense.
Okay,
you know,
good.
I did.
Good.
Back then, the rules were different. We had the flag, you know, deal where you had to, if you fouled the whole three, if anybody fouled the whole man 3 times in succession, you were ejected.
Yep.
And
so then you had to switch plays and stuff like that.
You had to switch, so you could get 2 fouls on the guy, then you had to switch out.
Oh yeah.
And you know, there was a lot of driving. You know, it just seemed like there was more driving back then than there is now. I think the players are, and the big difference now is that the coaching is so much better, and the players are so much better. I mean, you know, it's amazing that the St. Mark's 75 team made the Sweet 16 in your tournament, because I don't think any of the teams that I played on could have competed with the St. Mark's teams of the last 10 years, for instance.
I think you're selling yourself short a little bit, Houston, and your team short. And plus, the 75 team was kind of like that kind of represented the 75 and the 77 team kind of combined a little bit.
Yeah, that team was good. That team was really good. That 75 team. But you know, you have to remember the competition where we thought it was really stout back then. And you know, Alamo Heights and the Clear Creek, Clear Lake. Were really Lamarck, Humble. Those were the teams that we would always end up playing at state.
So, like, that was a fall season back in the day.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a fall season starting for UIL in fall 2021. But so every weekend, so like you drove down to San Antonio or you drove down to Houston. Is that how it pretty much works?
Almost every weekend. And it wasn't a really long season, maybe a couple months. And but yeah, we would make road trips literally every weekend, and nobody ever came up to Dallas.
Come on, like you never had a home game? Because I know Mihai doesn't like to have home games now either, but
I don't recall ever having those teams up to Dallas.
Okay, I do remember. This is a long time ago. I was a 6th or 7th grader, and I came up and played at a state championship for 8th grade and under at the St. Mark's pool from San Antonio. This was a little bit later. This was like in the early 80s, but yeah, so that was a long time ago.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know there was middle school water polo in the 80s.
Apparently, yeah. I
didn't
remember
have
taking a trip.
Yeah, because I remember I was introduced to water polo at Camp Longhorn.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah, and so the guy that started Tags Water Polo, Tex Robertson, and coached the UT team, you know, started this Camp Longhorn on Inks Lake, and it was very aquatics focused. And one of the things we did was play water polo, you know, in these pools that were, you know, set out into the lake. And that was a lot of fun. And we also played a version of water polo called watermelon water polo, where
Really?
they'd grease the watermelon and they'd paint it like white. And you would just basically try to take it underwater, hold on to that greased watermelon, and make it down to the other end without getting drowned.
That sounds like
And so
a
that was
game.
quite fun.
That sounds like a game for swimmers that don't have any ball handling skills. So there you go.
Yeah, it was
But-
great. And but anyway, so I started playing water polo my freshman year at St. Mark's, largely because I had been injured. I was a competitive tennis player, when I was 12, 13, 14. And but I played football in the fall. So I was the quarterback on the middle school team. And but I had to have knee surgery. My knees got messed up from tennis and football. And so I had also learned water polo, at camp, and I was a swimmer in middle school during the winter. So I was a pretty good swimmer. So I just dropped football and took up water polo my freshman year. That's how I got into it.
There's been plenty of people that have kind of dropped football or dropped basketball and come over to the pool. So it's been great.
Yeah.
And nowadays, water polo is one of the biggest sports at St. Mark's.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the aquatics program at St. Mark's, water polo and swimming. I mean, it's definitely the biggest sport at St. Mark's in terms of people. They started in middle school, and I think there's 30 kids on the water polo team, and probably more than that on the swim team.
Yeah, I mean, it's just grown by leaps and bounds. Even since I've been up here for the last 10 years, it's grown like the sheer numbers. And now, I mean, so water polo back in the day, we already talked about a couple rules and such that were different. You have watched water polo now and kind of grown over the past couple decades. What's the primary differences? Just besides the coaching and such like that, from the water polo back in the 70s and the water polo nowadays.
Well, I mean, one big difference is there's so many more teams that play, and there's women, and there's girls that play. So it's just a much bigger sport now than it was back then in terms of participation. I'd also say that the overall level of play is far greater. I mean, the kids are putting a lot of effort into it, and we have club water polo now, so kids are able to play year round. So kids are getting better coaching, and they're working harder at it for longer, and so they're a lot better.
So were you able to play?
Skills are a lot better.
So we back in the day, were you able to play outside your high school season kind of at all?
No. There was no club water polo in North Texas until 10 years ago?
Yeah. But I mean, I just didn't know if there was masters or not back in the day. But no, I mean, it's just that's amazing that you guys were so successful and only played for about 2 to 3 months a year. So yeah, that's incredible. Yeah. But I think that was the way that everybody did it throughout the state too, because everybody then would go into swim season, and then they'd have baseball or something in the spring, and then everybody would go do something during the summer. Well, I don't think there was a whole lot of people playing a lot. Yeah,
I mean, the level of all sports has been elevated a lot in the last 40, 50 years. I mean, so back in the day, it was like, I could play water polo in the fall, I'd swim in the spring, and then in the winter, and then in the spring, 1 year I played baseball, 1 year I played golf, 1 year tennis. I finished up strong as a senior with ping pong.
Really?
Yeah.
There you go. That's a little different, but that's okay. A little bit less injuries happening.
Basically, it was the way for me to get off campus very quickly.
Oh, I understand. You got to find the loopholes. The loopholes. So now, like, how many teams were at the state championship back in the 70s?
I think we had probably about it was 16 or 8. I can't remember how many exactly made it. I think my senior year, I remember we played a round robin on Saturday and Sunday, and my guess is that 8 teams qualified for the state championship. And I remember we ended up we lost to Clear Creek by 1, and then Alamo Heights beat Clear Creek by 1, and then the final game was we played Alamo Heights, and we literally scored a goal with like 1 second left to win by 1. And so all 3 teams ended up with the same record and the exact same goal differential. So all of us shared the state title that year.
Yeah, I definitely see that on. That everybody has to take a little bit of a double take whenever they're going up the list of the former state champions.
And there was not enough time to keep playing, so we had to go home.
Oh, hey, you know what? I have been kicked out of pools before, kind of during tournaments. So, but that must have been very nice to end the tournament like that, but a little bittersweet that you have to share it too. So.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I remember that game against Alamo Heights. I actually wrote my college essay on that game.
Really?
Yeah.
What specifically on the game?
It was just so dramatic. Just the back and forth and the physical effort that it took, and the twists and turns, and how it related to. I think water polo is a great sport for a lot of reasons, and one is that it's so difficult, and you have to work so hard, and you've got to fight through stuff during a game, and if you get bad calls, you got to roll with it, so that's I don't remember the exact details of my essay, but I remember it must have been a pretty good essay because it got me into where I wanted to go. So.
Yeah, and you went to Harvard, and you graduated in '82, and you actually started as a freshman in the club team, and you guys transitioned to a varsity team for your junior year. How was that overall experience at Harvard?
Well, it was really interesting. We played at a really good pool that was pretty new when I got there, called Blodgett. It had an indoor 50-meter pool with a separate kind of major league kind of diving well, and the water polo team was club, but we had a lot of people that were really into it. I mean, and the current chairman of USA Water Polo, Mike Graff, was actually one of our refs. So he had played when he was in graduate school there, several years older, but he'd come back and referee. And but our coach was a guy who was a swim coach for a local club, Belmont Swim Club. And but we had, it was great. I mean, we had a really fun group of guys. It became very much of a social thing as well.
Of course,
we all got along.
It always does in college athletics. So
yeah, and but it was freewheeling. I mean, I won't get into too much of what we do, but we didn't have any supervision.
We can stick to the pool. We can stick to the pool if you like.
We'll stick to the pool. But it was quite fun, and we'd travel around and we'd played all the other Ivy League teams, and we'd beat them all except for Brown.
Okay.
Brown had a really good coach, and they recruited from California. All of my teammates were, I think when I started as a freshman, I had almost all of them from California, but we had a goalie from Miami, and we had another guy who was also a senior when I got there, who was from St. Louis, who was a really good player. And I was the only Texan. But it was great fun. We played, Iona, Fordham, Bucknell, Navy, all the other, like Duke, teams like that. And then
so for your first,
we'd have UCLA or Stanford would make a trip through through the East.
Nice.
And we'd play them.
And that was always a humbling experience, I'm sure, even back in the day, right?
It was a humbling experience, but we when we played UCLA, we played at Blodgett, and it was on local TV. So I actually scored a goal on local TV.
There you go.
Yeah,
so
now we lost 15-3.
That's okay. You did like you didn't let him score 20. That's the main thing. So, but now how did you get it going from club to varsity? What was that process? Obviously, you were probably part of that process in the day.
Yeah, I was. My sophomore year. Some of the guys a year older than me, and as well as some as me and some of my classmates decided that, hey, we're taking this pretty seriously, and we're not bad, for the East. So why don't we? And we're playing teams like Yale was varsity at the time, and Brown was varsity, and we wanted to beat Brown. badly.
Of course.
And so we figured maybe we need to be varsity. And so we petitioned the athletic department, and lo and behold, they said yes. And we actually did have one woman on the team.
That's okay.
And so she played on the men's team, varsity.
Was she a good, productive player on the men's team?
Yeah, she was. Yeah. I mean, she wasn't very, very large or anything, but
but short, quick, and aggressive can make up for that. So
yeah. So, but it changed quite a bit as once we became varsity. But the other thing that we did was we had 2 seasons up there. So we'd play in the NCAAs in the fall, and then we'd take the winter off, and then the spring we could play club. So, and we continued that even after we were varsity. So we'd play varsity in the fall, and then we'd have our club team, kind of start up in the spring. So it was, a lot of water polo up there.
it was the best of both worlds. It was the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it was.
So you were supervised in the fall with a coach and practices, and then in the spring, maybe not as supervised. So
yeah, exactly.
Did you ever get Rowdy Gaines to come out and play?
No, Rowdy Gaines was not there, but Bobby Hackett was at Harvard.
Oh, I thought Rowdy Gaines was at Harvard because I know that his name's on the record board up there. So,
well, that's because I'm sure he came. I think he swam for Georgia or Tennessee or something like that,
okay.
Florida. But Bobby Hackett was at Harvard, but he was not a water player. He was the best arm wrestler I ever saw.
Okay, that's a little cross training. That would actually you would think that would transition kind of to the pool. Did he at least try it? Did he at least try water polo?
Never came out. I don't think his coach, who was also his local swim coach, Joe Bernal, was also the head swim coach at Harvard, and he had Bernal's Gators, and Bobby was a product of that program, and that's why he was at Harvard. So I don't think Joe Bernal would have ever let Bobby try water polo.
Did you let any of the swimmers ever come over?
Yes.
Okay.
We had lots of swimmers.
Good.
Lots of guys that did both.
And Blodgett Pool is still a very nice pool, and they have kept it up very well up there. My one funny story from Harvard was my first year coaching of varsity water polo on the East Coast. This is before I had even coached a game. There was a tournament at Harvard the first weekend of the season. We weren't playing, so I thought I'm going to go up to Harvard and scout my competition. So I had never been to Harvard. I had never been to Boston, so I drove up there. And this is back in the day whenever I had to get out the MapQuest stuff, and their stuff wasn't on their phone. And I'm driving around the Harvard campus, and I'm looking for any sign of a pool type thing, and I have to stop. And I asked, finally, this on a Saturday morning, the 7th person I asked finally knew, kind of where the pool was. The 7th person, no one else knew where the pool was at the time. And I'm like, really? Come on! And then it was across the river, so that's why it wasn't actually on campus. I mean, it was on campus, but it was more adjacent to campus. But I was like, okay, they have their priorities straight up here. Like the athletics wasn't like the biggest thing for a lot of those students there. So, but
Harvard is one of the few places where you have to learn how to swim to grade.
Really? Okay. Then I'm shocked that there weren't more people that had the ability to know where the pool was, but that's okay. But now after Harvard, you went and worked and became very successful in the business world and kind of made your way back to North Texas and eventually started playing again for Dallas Water Polo. So how'd that happen?
Yeah, it's funny. I spent about 4 years in New York after graduating from college, and then came back down to Dallas in '86, and worked in the investment business, which I still do. And but I stopped playing water polo when I was 22, and then I started again 22 years later when I was 44. And the reason is my kids, one of my daughters was getting tutored by a math teacher at St. Mark's for math.
Okay.
And she was married to Mihai Oprea.
Really? I didn't
who
know.
I didn't know.
That is
I didn't know. And so, but I knew he was a swimming and water polo coach, and I think I'd met him once, so I knew he was from Romania. And, but I didn't really know him. And we started talking about water polo. I said, oh boy, you know, I wish I could play now because, you know, when I was 26, I started wearing glasses, and now I wear contacts, and, you know, there's no way I'm going to get in the pool with with glasses on.
Yeah.
And my contacts are going to wash out. And that was my perception.
Yeah. Okay.
And she said, no, what are you talking about? Lots of people play water polo with contacts on. I said, really? And she said, yeah, you should come out, call Mihai. So I did. And he told me about Dallas Water Polo Club, so I came out. So it's just a serendipitous meeting with Janice Oprea, who basically got me back into water polo.
And you don't say no to Janice. So
No.
yeah, like if she wants you to go play, you're going to go play for sure. So I didn't know that story actually. So, and then how was it getting back into the pool? There's no flags on the pool deck. There's no switching in center defense. It's a whole different game.
Well, you know, it's in one way it was like riding a bike again, but unfortunately it was like riding a bike like a 3-year-old. And because I remembered how to do things, how to do the egg beater and how to swim and how to shoot and so forth and so on. But, you know, I had never really been trained by a real water polo coach.
Yeah.
So I was more like, I just figured it out kind of. And, but it was really fun because there were people like Mihai. I can't say enough about what people like Mihai Oprea have done for water polo in the state, and Frank Connor and Andres Rodriguez and George Fenton and all the people who had been, you know, with Dallas Water Polo from the time that Mihai kind of came to the United States. I don't remember if he started it, but he got involved, and they had some really, really good teams before I was even born.
And they still have some good teams still. So
yeah. And so, but it was great because there were people on those teams that when I started, I mean, I used to have, the first 6 months I'd have to ice my shoulders after almost every time getting in the water because, you know, I just was not used to swimming.
It was 22 years. It was 22 years. So there you go.
Yeah. And, but it was great, you know, within a reasonably short period of time, you know, I kind of got into the flow pretty well, and got to play a lot of water polo against most of the teams in Texas, but we've, you know, taken a lot of trips to other places as well, Chicago and California and so forth and so on. So it's been fun.
I actually played at that tournament in Chicago. That was a long time ago. Jeez.
I remember that.
So now, I mean, also kind of you came back and played Master Water Polo, and you mentioned George Fenton, who kind of led the way as far as the starting and getting a lot more youth water polo going back in 2009. How did you what part did you play, and how did you get involved, or kind of how did George get you involved then?
So I guess you're going to have to remind me exactly what year it was. So I think I started playing Dallas Masters in 2004, and I'm guessing it was maybe 2009 or so.
Yep. That is when we started youth water polo.
And at that time, it was still only us up, you know, it was Dallas Water Polo Club, Masters. It was St. Mark's, and maybe one or two other high schools in North Texas.
Correct.
That was the only water polo we had.
Yeah, there was South Lake Carroll played boys and girls, and then Denton kind of played a combined boys and girls.
Right. So there was very little water polo. I mean, SMU wasn't playing anymore. And George came to me and he said, I want to start a junior program within Dallas Water Polo Club, and I think we should hire Joe Linehan from Houston and bring him up here to do it. And I don't know if you had already talked to George about this idea at that point. I think you had. I think you and George had already worked this stuff out. And George wanted me to help pay for it. And I said, absolutely, I'd love to do that. Even though the only thing I know about Joe was what I saw on the pool deck from the other side.
That was a little, I can be loud.
A lot of very assertive coaching going on there.
But our teams were competitive and well coached and stuff like that.
Yeah, they were. and very, very well coached and very competitive. And I also knew that you had been, you were basically one of these water polo animals that eat, sleep, and drink water polo. And you'd done a great job of growing the sport in Houston. So made a lot of sense. And so we brought you, George and I partnered on this endeavor from a financial standpoint. And we brought you up here, and the rest is history.
Yeah. And and I appreciate you stepping up, and it was a challenge coming up here. Yeah, for sure. But I also kind of see it as a blank canvas, and without the support of you and George and the community, it would not have happened. And this was a huge kind of a team effort. Yeah, by far. And you were a big part of that. So I thank you. So any of those athletes that played back in the day or are playing now, it is because of the decisions of George and Houston and some others that were involved to actually kind of make a concerted effort. We are going to build our junior water polo program here. So,
yeah, I mean, guys like I mentioned, Mihai and Andres Rodriguez and Frank Connor was huge, and all the people that have refereed and helped coach, that really started, that were part of the Dallas Water Polo Club. So I think
exactly.
the Masters community up here has deserves a lot of credit.
And now the wonderful part is that a lot of those players that played back in 2009 or after are now coming back and playing now for Dallas Water Polo Club.
Exactly. So all these kids that I got to know when they were 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade at St. Mark's went on to win state championships and go play at Brown or Cal or Navy or wherever they went, are now coming back.
So as a Masters player back in those days, like especially the early days, whenever we were kind of ramping up all the events around the state and such, how was it going and playing as Dallas to go play like a Viper Pigeon team or a Thunder team or a St. Mark's team and going, I have to play these guys again?
It was really fun, actually, because the high school kids did not like to lose to us.
Oh no!
and I remember hearing you and other coaches saying, "Those guys are old enough to be your parents." And
swim them.
And so our whole strategy was to hold on.
Yeah, exactly. We also tell them they're just going to hold you. Just keep moving. Yeah. They will let go.
And and mostly we beat teams, but we not always. And it was really challenging and to play people that were in shape, because we never were in very good shape and still aren't in great shape. But
that's Masters Water Polo, though. So
yeah, Masters Water Polo. We try, but I mean, it's hard when you're practicing for an hour or two a week.
Well, Joe and I have been talking on this machine for like 90 minutes or maybe even 2 hours or something like that. So I think we're done. But as usual, let's hear what's coming up this week and beyond, Joe.
Yeah. So tonight, this is going to be out there before the podcast gets kind of published on the website. Mm-hmm. But on Tuesday, May 19th at 6:30 p.m., we have our town hall meeting. It's going to be about athletes going to play water polo in college from Texas, specifically from Texas, because it is a little bit different for everybody. So we're going to be going over that. And then this week we also started with our coaches to coaches on both Tuesdays and Thursdays. So prior to kind of recording this podcast, we had the coach to coaches with Jeff Otten. And then this upcoming Thursday at 12:30, we have our coach to coaches with Coach Sabrina Carlisle. So, and then next week will be Mihail Preya and Jeff Chandler. The week after that's going to be myself and Caitlin Kelly. And we'll keep those two per week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, kind of going through the first week of June. And then we're going to change it up a little bit and probably kind of do it at a different day, a different time, and maybe not as regular. So, but as everybody gets busy getting back to practice and just get busy with their summer vacations. So
that is so the hope, absolutely, is that people are going to be too busy to take part in these things all the time. But until then, yeah, it's great to have these things. And then also, obviously, as we've just been talking about our Best of Texas 2, and a reminder to contact us. Like if you have input about the programs that have excelled over the longest period of time, then let us know. And you can just write us at pod@txwaterpolo.com. All right. Anything else, Joe?
No, James. Take care and good luck in the pool. So.
Yes, practice tomorrow, 3 o'clock, for those of my AquaTexans who are listening. So, yes, thank you very much, Joe. And thanks to Houston Hall for taking time to talk with you. And thanks to everybody for listening and telling a friend about the TX Water Polo Podcast. Keep an eye open. There might be some Total Water Polo podcasts coming up, too, just to let you know. But you can find us on TXWaterpolo.com, listen to the podcast, find us on social media, leave comments, give it the cause, and generally stay up to date with the state of the game. But until next week, so long from Austin.
This has been a production of TWP Sports LLC.
My dog is scratching at the door.
I can hear him.